Okay, so in this video we're going to be discussing and translating Pliny's letter 6-4, that is book 6, letter number 4, that he is writing to his wife. So let's go ahead and get started. So as is always the case, in the nominative case, Gaius Plinius, and then that S stands for obviously Salutem Dicit, says greetings to his own Calpurnia. And so he starts out by saying, Nunquam, never have I complained. Remember, the questus comes from the deponent verb queror, queri, questusum, meaning to complain. So never have I complained, in which when you add a present of the verb to be to a perfect, in this case passive looking participle, it creates a perfect passive verb. But here it's passive looking. So never have I complained more de occupationibus meis, about my busyness, about my business, as it were. My busyness, quae, which non sunt passa, yet another deponent, perfect passive looking verb, from the verb that obviously is principal parts patior, pati, passa, sum. It means to suffer, endure, allow, and in this sense I think that we're going to go with allow. So which has not allowed, and again it's perfect, me out, either to follow you setting out. Remember that when it comes to both present infinitives and present participles, it is going to imply not necessarily present, but more so same time. In plus accusative, into Campania, for the sake of your health, for the sake of your strength. And so she's going to be taking his Calpurnia, a little retreat down to Campania, to bathe in the sunshine and obviously try to recover from some unknown health issue. Out, or to follow you, having set out out of your footsteps. So with the present participle, it would be implied that he would be going and setting out with her, but with the perfect passive participle, or passive looking participle, obviously, proficiscor, proficisci, profectisum, this following would be, obviously, she's already gone, and so he's going to be right behind her, following in her footsteps. And so therefore, he wants to go and spend time with his wife, excuse me, making sure that she's okay, but he can't because obviously he's busy in the city and cannot go into Campania. Nunc enim praecipive. And so, indeed, or for now, especially I was desiring to be together. And so he wants especially to spend time with her, and we find out here why. Ut, so that, and so this is a purpose clause that we have, would be in the secondary sequence. Remember, primary sequence and secondary sequence is determined by the verb that is the one upon which the subordinate clause is dependent. Since it is an imperfect, we're in secondary sequence, and an imperfect subjunctive within the subordinate clause is going to dictate that that action is going to either be at the same time or afterwards. So that I was trusting, or so that I would trust at some point afterwards, my eyes. Remember, the datives are going to be the objects of special verbs that require dative objects. Normally a dative would translate to or for, or if it is the dative of agent, by, but when it is functioning as the object of the verb that requires a dative object, you don't use the preposition to or for, or obviously by. So that I would trust my eyes, what you add, what you were adding, both to your strengths and what you were adding to your little body. Corpusculo is diminutive, and it implies the frailty that she would have. Equid means normally anything, but in this context it can also have the meaning of whether. Whether, finally, you would transmit, and again I'm using things like would, could, might, can, because we are in subjunctive, the pleasures of your retreat. Here is your genitive singular, fourth declension. And you would transmit the abundance of the region, you in offensa, you unharmed, i.e. he wants to know whether she's obviously experiencing this retreat and not having a little bit too much fun, not obviously overdoing it, that she's obviously there as a recovery instead of there as a luxuriating in some sort of a vacation. In other words, have fun, but not too much fun, because remember, you are there to not overdo it. You are there to recover in whatever this health issue that you might have. So again, I'm going to translate it. For especially I was desiring to be together, so that I might trust my own eyes. What you add to your strengths, what you add to your little body, whether you transmit finally the pleasures of your retreat and the abundance of the region, not harmed, as it were. Continuing on. Equidem. Indeed, even I would desire you strong, not without care. Now, in our textbook, it is suggesting that this fortum te is implying the protasis, and that then this would be the implied apodosis, would as a translation, because it would be a present contrary to fact, which requires imperfect subjunctives. However, I might interpret it as being merely a potential subjunctive. Indeed, potentially I would desire you even strong, not without concern. And we have here the litotes, obviously, of denying the opposite of something. Essentially what he is saying is that even if you were strong, which now I'm obviously, even if I'm going along with the interpretation of our author, with etiam fortum te being the protasis, I would still want you and desire you, being concerned about you, not without care. For it is suspenseful and anxious-filled. And so, to know nothing. And so here we have, as the subject of the est, is going to be the act of knowing nothing. And of course, est is our linking verb. And so both of the CPA complement predicate adjectives are neuter, implying that the gender of a noun, when it functions as the subject, or a noun in general, is going to be neuter. So, for it is suspenseful and anxious to know nothing from time to time, that's what interdiem means, about a person whom you desire, whom you love most ardently, a superlative adverb. And so he says, when you don't know about the person that you love, it is going to be incredibly suspenseful and anxious. Nunc vero me cum absentiae, and so forth and so on. Your subject here is the ratio, as in the ratio rationis, the account, the explanation, the rationale, whatever you would like. And so we're going to go here with account. Here, cum and tum is going to have the correlative meaning of both and an. And so, now, the account truly of both your absence and of your affirmity, that account, uncertain and varied, it terrifies me with anxiety. And so not knowing what's wrong with you, not knowing how you're doing, is the thing that obviously is terrifying me and keeping me up at night. So again, the account of both your absence and of your infirmity, that account truly, that account uncertain, unknown, and varied, it terrifies me. And so not knowing is what obviously makes me all worried and filled with fear and the like. And so he then goes on to say that explicitly. Verior, another deponent verb, verior, vereri, veritas sum, I fear all things, I imagine all things. Another subjunctive, or I should say deponent verb. And what nature there is of one's fearing, and so what is the nature of those fearing? Most greatly, I make up the neuter, plural, accusative, substanceized things. For myself, I make those things up. I imagine them, which I loathe, which I hate most greatly. And so he, even when with no information about how is she doing, he's imagining the worst possible scenarios is what's being implied here about his wife. And so again, it says, I fear all things, I imagine all things. And what is the nature of those fearing? This, I make up for myself, most especially, most greatly, the things which I most greatly hate or loathe. Here is your ablative of degree of difference, and by which amount implied, more heavily I ask. In other words, more urgently, more heavily I ask that you consult, i.e. console, and it takes here your dative object, that you consult my fear with, or that you console my fear with singular letters daily, or even double letters daily. And so in other words, please take into account my worry, and so please give me information, let me know how you're doing, send me individual letters daily, or even better, double letters daily. For Adam, I will be more secure, I will be more at ease while I read them, and immediately I will fear cum. Here is a cum clause with a perfect subjunctive. If it were perfect subjunctive, it would need to be erim. I wonder what's going on here. So, nevertheless, when I will have read them. So not a perfect subjunctive, but more a future perfect indicative. I was thinking that it was perfect subjunctive all along, but I was wrong because that would be the wrong form in that it is erim, eris erit, for the perfect subjunctive, and ero, eris erit, for the future perfect indicative. And so we're going to make it a future perfect indicative cum temporal clause. And then, of course, finally, wale, be strong. So, worried about his wife? Keep studying. Good letter. Thanks.